Good morning, everybody. My name is Jerry Green, and I work at the Pacific Council. And I am really very, very pleased to welcome all of you to Amplify's Pitch Day and our Culmination ceremony. This week, most of you know, it's been the Summit of the Americas, which has been chaotic and challenging for almost everybody except maybe President Biden, because he doesn't have to sit in traffic. So I've really been looking forward to something a little productive, a little more interactive, and this is it. So I'm really very, very pleased that you can join us. The Peterson Automotive Museum, for those of you who haven't been here, take the long way out. You know, when you leave, it's really, really interesting. And the history of this museum is originally, the genesis was cars and California. So if you want to understand why we don't have mass transit and why there's terrible, all of that stuff, you sort of understand the thinking of our forebearers who got it wrong. But this is really a great museum. It really is, and it's about the history of California, which is all about cars. The Pacific Council, as you know, is a membership organization. We're not-for-profit. We are aggressively nonpartisan. I mean, we are in the business of promoting good citizenship and good citizenry, and informing and educating people. And sometimes that creates challenges. This is California. So Californians do have their preferences, and we need to be mindful of those, but we need to do our business, which is to educate people. The other thing we do is we want to be a reflection of our community. We don't want to be, it's not as if somebody dropped us by parachute and we kind of, where are we? And we opened up shop. This organization was purposefully created as being part of California, part of Los Angeles, and Los Angeles is arguably the most diverse place in the world. It is at once a Pacific Rim city, a Latin American city, and I would argue a quintessentially American city. The world of international affairs is not that. The world of international affairs is the profile of people who make careers in international affairs, is really rather narrow. It's narrow. Certainly traditionally has not reflected Los Angeles or California. And I'm not talking only about the East Coast centricity of foreign policy. California exists so politicians can come here, raise money, go back and ignore us until they run for office again. And they think we're the big ATM, but they don't think we have anything of interest or value to say. And that's just wrong in so many ways. We are closer to Mexico City than we are to Washington, D.C. We are a Pacific Coast, a Pacific Rim city. I had lunch yesterday with the Australian ambassador who was visiting. They have a big consulate here, and he was saying why they have a consulate and why they come to LA. The ports of Long Beach and Los Angeles bring in 60% of the imports to the United States. They are the carotid artery of this country, and they are here. So I can do my global LA shtick, which I won't, but the piece that's relevant to Amplify is we believe the foreign policy formulation and execution infrastructure, the human capital infrastructure, should reflect Los Angeles. We are the future, but only sooner. I grew up in Boston. I've lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and Chicago, and Texas, and Arizona, Tehran, Cairo. I've lived in a lot of places. And LA really is special and distinctive. So what Amplify is meant to do is two things. One is to broaden the pipeline into the world of international affairs. So the Amplify Fellows are people that we've identified with enormous promise, enormous talent, and we kind of want to give them a nudge. We want to kind of help them. The second thing that we asked of the Amplify Fellows, which again is different, is back in the day, there was a distinction between domestic politics and international politics. And they would say, oh, that's a domestic issue, and they would ignore it. Oh, that's an international issue, that's not for us. Those days are long gone. long gone. That's simply not true. What I'm thinking as an Angelina is if I was President Biden, the President of the United States, I'd be pretty embarrassed hosting an event in Los Angeles where there are more people, unhoused people living on the street than any place I have ever. I mean, I've been to some places and I would be embarrassed. And I went to a speech that our mayor made, who's, a good guy and a great speaker. And, we did, politics, we did this, we did, everything good as a result of, of City Hall. And I'm thinking to myself, this is embarrassing. This is embarrassing. I mean, I just drove here. I live in Agora, for those of you from LA, which is, up the 101 freeway towards Ventura County. And just driving, crisscrossing through Hollywood, and the way I got here today, on the 101 freeway, right before the Highland exit at the Hollywood Bowl, there's a street, and that whole street are ramshackle RVs where people live, where people actually live. So this notion that domestic is somebody else's problem, international is somebody else's problem, that is profoundly, not only is it wrong, but it's bad. It's bad. So the other thing we were looking for in the AMPLIFY Fellows were people who do things domestically with global applications. Let me give you a real example. We hosted Samantha Power, who is the head of the Agency for International Development, which is the leading foreign aid agency of the United States government. They put a lot of money around the world. So who did we have interview her and host the session? A woman named Elise Buick, who's the head of the United Way. The United Way doesn't do a lot of international stuff. They do, domestic stuff. But Elise Buick is an expert on homelessness, malnutrition, migrants, all of the issues that make LA less good than it should be because we're not getting it right. She's an expert on. And that was the point of the exercise, to try and meld domestic and international. So I want to end by introducing our fellows. I'm sorry, we have panelists who I want to introduce, and then we'll do other introductions later. Sorry. I get these wonderful documents from my colleagues, and then I ignore them, and I just kind of, try and have structured stream of consciousness. But what I really want you to take away from this are two things. One is the American foreign policy establishment and formulators of U.S. foreign policy need to look like the United States. And back in the day, that was not the case. It's gradually going in that direction. We would like to accelerate. I'm old, so I want this to happen before I go to my great reward. And second, there is no distinction between domestic and international. None whatsoever. None whatsoever. We sent a delegation to Birmingham, Alabama. Why did we go to Alabama? Because how can we tell other countries to practice democracy when we, are doing this in such a flawed way ourselves? We're talking about, how many people China executes. Well, maybe we ought to talk about mass incarceration in the United States. Maybe we ought to talk about different morbidity rates as a consequence of COVID based on ethnicity. I mean, there's so much to talk about. Every one of these issues has global applications. If we don't get it right at home, we will never get it right internationally. That's what the AMPLIFY Fellows have been recruited to address, and I have no doubt that they will. It's a remarkable group. Let me turn it over to my colleagues. I want to introduce our first our expert panelists. The first is Imran Ali, who is a principal at Via Transportation, where he worked with public transit agencies to develop transportation solutions for vulnerable populations. I was talking to Imran. Despite that, he likes cars. So you can be, we need decent, we need to be able to move around the city, but you can still like cars as artifacts of a bygone era or things that are really pretty. It's talk about domestic and global, traffic is a really, really good example. And the consequences of being in a gridlocked city are profound. Most people don't think about it, but if you can't, go from point A to point B, how do you get anything done? Imran led government affairs and safety communications at Zoox. He worked at McKinsey, which means he's really smart. McKinsey are the people that solve the world's problems. He worked at the Obama White House in legislative affairs. He's an MBA from Wharton on the University of Pennsylvania and has a BS in management from Georgia Tech. Our other expert panelist is our own Carmel Lim, who is Vice President and Managing Director of Initiatives and Partnerships at the Pacific Council. She and Jasmine are the co-leaders of Amplify. Carmel is also an independent management consultant who specializes in not-for-profits and startups. I never use the word nonprofit. I always say not-for-profit. There's a slight nonprofit. I like not-for-profit. That's purposeful. Nonprofit means you're kind of screwing up. Oh, we couldn't make a profit. So it's one of those sort of, differences without a distinction, but I never end a sentence with a preposition. I don't split infinitive. I'm kind of old school. So I never say nonprofits. I say not-for-profits because that sounds purposeful. Carmel is also an independent management consultant, and she used to run her own not-for-profit. She was executive director for Common Cause Hawaii. So she, did what I do, and thus I asked her, who's that mayor in New York? Ed Koch. He'd run around and say, how am I doing? So I don't go to Carmel and say, how am I doing? But I do ask her to sort of weigh in and tell me how we're doing. And she has a master's in public policy from the University of Michigan, a well-loved university at the Pacific Council. I don't know where Mariah is. Mariah here. Mariah is leaving to get a master's at the University of Michigan. Jerry Green was a professor at the University of Michigan, so we have a soft spot for Michigan here. And finally, I want to introduce truly the most important person in the room, which is Jasmine Rogala. She's the Pacific Council's Associate Director of Programs. She basically envisioned, built, oversaw the AMPLIFY program. She is central. If we've done anything right, it's because of Jasmine. If we've done anything wrong, it's because of me. That buck stops with me. The fun bucks stop with Jasmine, and the unfun ones stop with me. But honestly, she has really, in my case, kept me on task in a very, very nice but firm, determined way. She is, fearless and, inviting people to be involved, to attend, to support, and so forth. So really, any success we enjoy, Jasmine gets the lion's share of the credit, and of course the AMPLIFY Fellows. So I'm going to turn it over to everybody else. Thank you all for coming. I hope I haven't exceeded my time. I ignored time. If I didn't, it was a mistake. But thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much, Jerry. It has been my true honor. I'm Jasmine Rogala. I am the Associate Director of Programs here at the Pacific Council. And thank you all for being here to support the AMPLIFY program and watch the culmination of our inaugural class of AMPLIFY Fellows, who it has been my true honor to watch them grow and evolve throughout these 16 weeks of the program. We have met virtually for 16 weeks, and they were tasked with various difficulties and challenging topics, such as how to build a board of directors, how to engage with them, what are fundraising fundamentals. They went through media training workshops. They were given assignments on how to approach local organizations that they may have not talked to before, how to approach global organizations that they have not talked to before, after all the networking, mentorship, and opportunities that the AMPLIFY program has provided to them. Separately, they were assigned mentors in which each of them were focused on their unique field of industry. As you may have heard, we have a local to global mindset. And in this local to global mindset, each of the AMPLIFY Fellows applied with a local to global project, something in which they were able to impact their local community as well as scale that up into their global community and see how that would evolve. We also had a wraparound mentorship opportunity because some of them are full-time parents. They also have full-time jobs. They have the world around them that's constantly changing and impacting them. And so we had a wraparound debrief mentor to help provide support and Through this professional development experience, I have seen all of them grow, and I'm so thankful to each and every one of them to launch this inaugural class. So with that said, the format of the day, we will have the fellows presenting their projects for about 10 minutes. Our esteemed panel guests will ask about 1 to 2 questions. So I ask each of the fellows to stay on stage. And then while the fellows are presenting, I please ask you to stay in your seats and refrain from getting a cup of coffee or having a cup of tea until we're in that transition mode. We are currently live streaming today's presentation, and so for all of those who cannot be here today, I thank you from watching afar, and I thank you for supporting the Amplify Fellows and this program throughout these 16 weeks. Without further ado, I would love to introduce our first Amplify Fellow, Kyla Denwood, who received her bachelor's degree from Tulane University, where she earned dual degrees in economics and international development. Kyla was a youth ambassador at Expo 2020 Dubai, where she represented Illinois and Louisiana as a cultural ambassador at the USA Pavilion. Currently, she serves as a research associate for the International Programs Department of NORC at the University of Chicago, where she researches a variety of topics ranging from youth engagement to poverty alleviation to democracy and governance in countries all over the world. During Amplify, Kyla was mentored by Nola Haynes, who is the director of the West Coast chapter of Women of Color Advancing Peace and Security. Please welcome Kyla Denwood.
Oops, sorry. And do I have a presentation, Jasmine? Yes. Okay, perfect. Oh, awesome. Great. Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyla Denwood, and I am on a mission to increase the accessibility of international affairs opportunities and careers with the Youth International Leadership Initiative, YILI for short. Before I introduce this organization, I would love to give you some background on our current international affairs climate. From food insecurity to climate change to the COVID-19 pandemic, we can plainly see how international affairs and foreign policy affect our local communities and our daily lives with a simple trip to the gas station. As the world becomes more globalized, it is up to our national governments and civil society organizations to protect the US economy as well as advance our nation's interests and the security of the American people. Luckily for us, the US has acted as a global hegemon of world politics, shaping the geopolitical order since 1945. In a perfect foreign policy system, the United States utilizes its unique source of strength, its diversity and plurality, to operate in our diverse world. It's a strength that few countries can match and of the utmost importance in our nation's national security. But while this idea is important in theory and has been repeated by our nation's leaders, such as President Biden, Secretary of State Blinken, and just yesterday by USAID Administrator Samantha Power, let's take a look at its execution by asking ourselves, who are our nation's international affairs leaders? To put a number to this question, we can take a look at the makeup of our nation's leaders of foreign policy at the US State Department. Oh, whoops. Great. Based on figures from the Government Accountability Office in 2020, we can tell that the Department of State has a serious systemic diversity problem. Though 40% of American population is a racial or ethnic minority, only 13% of the department's senior executive service are people of color. The Department of State was more diverse in 1986, literally, than it is now. According to the GAO figures, the ratio of African American employees has fallen since 2002. And personally, as someone who is looking to make an impactful career as a foreign service officer one day, a rather harrowing figure to me is that just 3% of the senior foreign service is Black. Since 2002, we have disproportionately lost senior foreign service officials who are non-white and non-male. Now, since the George Floyd shooting and America's racial reckoning in the summer of 2020, many government agencies and civil society organizations have acted to mediate this problem by hosting summits and speaking at colleges about careers in international affairs. And don't get me wrong, all advice is good advice, but we have been here before. Diverse young people have been systemically excluded from these conversations and events, and now more than ever, it is time for us young people to demand a change, to pull up folding chairs to the decision-making table. When compared to our elder counterparts in middle and late career journeys, youth can provide the most insightful advice when it comes to maneuvering around this area and entering into this competitive and costly career field. We also have access to the networks the government is targeting through our generational social media savvy. This is why I founded the Youth International Leadership Initiative, this non-for-profit, non-partisan organization that seeks to increase the involvement of diverse students and young professionals from non-coastal areas in international affairs careers. We will pay special attention to recruit students of color and individuals of lower socioeconomic status in our efforts. YILI was founded by myself with the help of my friends that I met while working at as a youth ambassador at Expo 2020 Dubai, the first World's Fair in the Middle East. The State Department recruited 75 American youth from across the country with the intention of highlighting American diversity to the public. I noticed two things while I was there. The first being that my colleagues from the coasts tended to have more international experiences than those from the middle of the country like myself, especially those from flyover states. The second was that even though we were recruited to represent the United States, the diversity of the United States, my white colleagues at Expo were more often chosen to meet with the international delegations and the world famous performers and musicians than my colleagues of color and myself. Following our departure, I reached out to the diverse and promising youth ambassadors from Middle America to staff my board. This includes members like Salsa Bila, a Muslim woman from Tennessee who works in film and social media. Spencer, a farmer from Kentucky who was able to connect with Expo visitors about international agriculture initiatives. Or Sierra from Colorado, who experienced homelessness as a youth and could speak to housing insecurity and increasing the program's accessibility. Our flagship program will be an online summer fellowship, meeting twice a year. Students will be able to learn exactly what it takes to enter into international affairs careers from wherever they are in the country. They will have the chance to meet with representatives from agencies all across the US government and private sector, as well as with youth just like them that are able to maneuver themselves into the field. As our organization is by youth, for youth, we can easily connect with each other and create a community across the internet that can grow and reach other audiences of similar backgrounds. And by building the knowledge of international affairs opportunities, including the fellowship program and fellowship programs and study abroad opportunities, we hope to create a pipeline for for youth from non-traditional backgrounds when entering into international affairs careers. We have a variety of program offerings. With our fellowship program, we will have, as I said earlier, bi-monthly educational meetings, as well as internship and job application guidance. Will increase their knowledge on competitive fellowship applications within this field. And we'll also be having a final project on a career, region, or technical interest of the students, similar to this pitch day event here. As we scale up and offer more opportunities for those that are not a part of our initial inaugural class, we will offer public virtual events surrounding different topics that will reach local and global audiences. We will offer passport and study abroad scholarships. And finally, we will offer an international career or internship fair within this field, specifically for diverse students from flyover states or Middle America. Our goals are to increase the awareness of international affairs in underserved communities, provide guidance for the next generation of international affairs leaders, and then bridge the knowledge gap of competitive scholarships and fellowships, such as the Gilman program that provides funding for FAFSA students to go abroad, as well as a critical language scholarship that provides funding for students to go across the world and learn critical need languages. As you can see here, this is a picture of our first event with World Chicago, where we spoke to 15 youth diplomats who are diverse students from across the Chicagoland area that are interested in pursuing international career opportunities. So how can you support? You can follow us on our social media platforms. We are live on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and my favorite social media platform, LinkedIn. You can nominate a student to participate in the program. As many of us know, a lot of us feel imposter syndrome, especially as we're entering into this field. And in order to access a larger variety of students, we hope to have a nomination platform. So students can come in that we're not initially thinking about this as a career field, but learn more about the opportunity and hopefully engage further. You can mentor a student. We need a variety of mentors, whether you are from a young professional like myself or a distinguished in your international career. And you can donate. So imagine yourself as a young person and entering into a room where not many people look like you. You might feel unprepared. So for our fellowship program, we are asking for $5,000 to receive, so students can receive professional toolboxes, which will include a notepad, calendar, as well as other things that they will need in order to pursue this career. We're also hoping to fundraise for passports and study abroad fellowships. I actually received my first passport for free from my university, and you might not think it, but $75 is sometimes really hard to afford, especially for students that are putting themselves through college. So even a small donation of $75 can change a student's life for the better. So thank you so much. And please follow us on social media for more information, and especially for more careers tips and opportunities for young professionals entering into this field. As I wrap up today, I would like to thank my YILI board members, our supporters from the State Department and the Citizen Diplomacy Action Fund, the Pacific Council for International Policy, my mentor, Nola Haynes, and the WCAPS family, and many Amplify speakers that have advised me along the way. And most importantly, Jasmine, Valerie, and my cohort members, without which I would not be here today. Thank you for your support, encouragement, and helping me build the confidence to make this vision turn into a reality. Thank you and have a great rest of your day.
Hello.
Hi.
Kyla, as a person of color and a Muslim that aspires to be a public servant, a senior one day, thank you for doing this work, and thank you for leading here. So my first question is, outside of nominations, how do you plan on raising awareness for those communities that you need it most?
Great question. So the number one answer is social media. We were lucky enough to receive some funding from the Department of State. And with that funding, we're going to be pushing out a social media campaign. And it's actually quite interesting how much even $1 can send a nomination form or an application form throughout like 10 more people's social media platforms, especially on LinkedIn, where young people are looking for opportunities currently, especially with COVID-19 pandemic canceling study abroad opportunities for students. Students need these last-minute opportunities to fill their resumes, as well as an opportunity to gain more information about the career field and other opportunities they can get beyond their internships that they lost because of the pandemic.
Thank you. And in terms of funding, thank you for sharing a little bit about that. Over the next 5 years, do you have an estimate of how much money you think you want to raise? You know, fundraising is very dependent on economic upturns and downturns. Like, what are your thoughts on making sure that this organization can outlast some of those challenges?
Yes, of course. So I've had experience working for previous civil society organizations such as the Black Professionals in International Affairs, as well as WCAPS. And from those experiences, I can tell that having a virtual platform such as this really reduces the cost of renting out event space and grabbing speakers from, you can increase the amount of speakers that you grab from areas of the country that would be willing to speak at these events for free. So that really does reduce our cost. With that, in the future, I hope to expand to having more in-person events, especially in the DC area, which is where I live now. And so with that will come an additional cost of, finding event space, as well as grabbing speakers from local organizations. So we estimate that it'll be about $2,000 to operate on a yearly basis, especially as this will be mainly a summer program. So we'll have events mainly in the summertime that will take that $2,000. Great. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kyla. What a wonderful presentation. Our next Amplify Fellow who will be presenting is Sarah Silaf, who works with local governments and nonprofits to support community planning processes, as well as economic and community development. Sarah previously served as a Council on Foreign Relations Hitachi Fellow in Japan, where she researched municipal responses to depopulation. Before that, she served as the Executive Director to the Center for Creative Land Recycling. She also has 4 years in federal service, where she started as the Presidential Management Fellow and then served as the Memphis team lead for the White House Council on Strong Cities, Strong Communities. She has been published by Bloomberg City Lab, Urban Land Online, the East West Center, and Tokyo Review. She holds a Master's of Public Affairs from Princeton University and a Bachelor's from Eckerd College. Sarah Silaf was mentored by Bill Smith, who is the director of the Martin Institute and Program in International Studies at the University of Idaho. Please welcome Sarah.
The poet Rumi says, "Sit, be still, and listen. For you are drunk, and we are at the edge of the roof." And welcome to the roof, by the way. What a great venue. So this is us. As a species, we are at the edge, and we're drunk on growth. Economic growth has delivered many good things, like rising life expectancies and a global reduction in poverty over the last 20 plus years. Small wonder then that we associate growth with gain. But the way we grow no longer serves us. We're focused on growing for growth's sake, and unless we step back and think, we could fall off the roof. So good morning. I'm Sarah Silaf, and our future depends on our ability to reimagine growth. Welcome to the Sapiens Project, a new effort I'm proposing to build a movement around this existential challenge. First, some background. This is world population growth over the last 12,000 years. It has doubled since 1975 and increased 8-fold since 1800. This is world GDP, gross domestic product, basically the size of the world economy, over the last 2,000 years. As we practice it now, economic growth requires the continued expansion of our consumption of energy and natural resources. This hockey stick-shaped graph is behind our current climate crisis. Things need to change, and intriguingly, they're about to, because for most of human history, economic growth has been intimately tied to population growth. But demographers predict that global population will peak by the 2060s. Now that's a problem, but it's also an opportunity. It's a problem because our economic system is predicated on more people buying more stuff. It's an opportunity because we know we need to decrease resource consumption in order to continue to survive on this planet. And if the number of people available to consume declines, that could be a positive thing for climate targets. But adjusting to these changes requires planning starting now. This is the shrinking Japanese city of Ito. It's an example of what's called a shutter town. Note that most of the shops are shuttered. So this is the kind of dislocation that comes from not planning for a shrinking population. Now, I find this intersection between demography, economy, and ecology fascinating. And in 2020 and part of 2021, I spent 15 months in Japan as a Council on Foreign Relations Hitachi Fellow. I was studying population aging and decline, one common sign of which are abandoned houses like these, known as akiya. And as an urban planner with a background in public policy, I wanted to know how Japanese cities are preparing for an older and smaller future. How were they thinking about shrinking? So here's some background. Japan hit peak people at 128 million in 2008. And since then, as you can see in red on the right, deaths have outnumbered births. Now immigration is limited, so for purposes of this analysis, it's out of the picture. And the Japanese government predicts that by 2065, Japan may lose 30% of its population. So how is Japan preparing for a smaller future? Government at all levels is urging people to have more kids. So that's right, rage against the machine, grow against the decline. And that was my aha moment. Shrinking cities are a symptom. The real issues are our beliefs and attitudes about growth. Why were so many Japanese leaders focused on population growth? Why weren't they planning for a smaller future? And in some places, perhaps even planning eventually to not exist. Now, psychologically, that is really hard, but the data about Japan's population decline is clear, and it's been that way for decades. What's happening now is not a surprise. So how do we change mindsets? How do we rethink growth? Because the need to rethink growth is urgent. Economic growth as we practice it now, as growth for growth's sake, accelerates the climate change that is already underway. And this threatens us and those who will come after us. Since the end of World War II, we've come to understand gross domestic product, or GDP, growth as the highest and greatest good. But GDP misses things, like the costs of climate change. We won't achieve a lower carbon future if we don't evolve our relationship with growth. And we're out of time. We need to start asking new questions, not someday, but now. And those questions need to start locally, because all politics is local. The people who negotiate international agreements and set national policy and priorities reflect the will and fears and concerns and values of American voters. And as long as we continue to demand growth at any cost, elected leaders will continue to deliver. And we will all lose. And that is a rough way to start your morning. So let's shift gears. We call ourselves Homo sapiens, wise man in Latin, and we flatter ourselves. But I believe we can live up to the potential in our name. And that's what I'm pitching today, the Sapiens Project. This is a project that asks tough and sometimes threatening questions about economic growth, what we believe about it, and how we value it. It elevates thought leadership and builds a community of practice, experimentation, and strategy. The Sapiens Project asks, for example, what we in the US can learn from places like Japan. Because while I did observe a big fixation on growth, I also saw some really interesting new models. These folks are in an organization called the Tech Lab in the shrinking town of Manazuru, which is focused on trying to make itself a good place to live regardless of its size. And it's doing that by using places like the Tech Lab to grow its sharing economy and facilitate population flow through temporary remote working arrangements. And Manazuru is measuring its success via the density of internal connections that are forged and quality of life, not population growth. And that's a subtle shift, but it's a significant one, and we could stand to learn from places like Manazuru. The Sapiens Project also elevates local examples. Children of the Setting Sun Institute is a think tank in Northwest Washington, founded and run by members of the Lummi Nation. Their Salmon People project spotlights the centrality of critically endangered salmon to many West Coast tribes, and it asks what it means to be salmon people in a future that may not include salmon. Children of the Setting Sun is showing the world what we stand to lose as we continue to prioritize growth. The Sapiens Project is also about truth. We can't green our way out of growth. When I interviewed the Reverend Takafumi Kawakami, a Zen priest based in Kyoto, he pointed out that the problem with sustainable development is that development still connotes growth. And this, he argued, and I think he's right, gives us the false idea that we can achieve sustainability without having to give anything up. And that is a really important point. So in 1979, two psychologists, Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, articulated prospect theory. And basically this says that humans weigh losses and gains differently, and losses hurt way worse than gains feel good. And an honest conversation about economic growth requires a conversation about loss. We don't like loss, which is why we need to stare straight at this cognitive blind spot and steady ourselves to make tough choices about what we value, why, and what those choices mean for the climate and for future generations. So I put these Japanese plum blossoms in here to remind us to all take a deep breath. We can create a space to have honest conversations about climate change, our collective future, and what it's going to take to get there. I envision the Sapiens Project as a not-for-profit organization, and through it, I'm proposing to produce articles, op-eds, and interviews with leading thinkers and doers, plus case studies featuring real-world examples of people and places who are considering and creating alternatives to growth as usual. The ultimate goal of this project is what I set out to do when I left for Japan in 2020, to create a toolkit featuring real applied materials to help local decision makers in the US and internationally advance this work. I want to build a network of communities that are focused on doing growth differently. And I haven't waited to start this. I've published articles in national and international venues, and I'm mostly done with a book proposal. But I can't go to scale alone. I'm seeking $250,000 to get this project off the ground. And if you or someone you know is interested in being part of this, I invite you to come along with me on this necessary, urgent, and high-stakes quest. $250,000 will launch the Sapiens Project by supporting research, network building, developing a public relations and media strategy, and executing it. So I invite you to join me at the forefront of this overdue movement. Contribute your knowledge and experience to the foundational mix. Brand yourself and your firm as the leaders who were there when the great shift began. Because if we don't shift, the future of Homo sapiens is seriously in doubt. To conclude, both climate change and population decline suggest that we have to get smaller and smarter faster. We have enough resources to feed and house everyone. We don't need continued growth. What we need is to get real about growth now. And that's what the Sapiens Project is about. It's about learning from and sharing with others and taking strategic action. It's about articulating what a livable future is going to demand of us, locally and individually. You can't shrink without giving something up. And that's really hard for Homo sapiens to handle. But shrinking is both necessary and inevitable. We have so much to gain. The question is how we will get there. So join me, because things should start to get interesting right about now. And thank you. Thanks to the Pacific Council and International Policy, and thanks to my mentor, Dr. Bill Smith.
That was a really great presentation. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks.
So I think you did a great job of discussing the impact of the problem and your approach to it. If you were to pilot some type of solution somewhere, where, like, is there a certain community that you'd want to do it, city, state, federal, another country? Like, how would you think about actually piloting solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. So having worked in Japan and dealt with my own language and dealt with the language barrier there, I think there's a lot of great things to learn in Japan, but I would start my work in the United States. And where I would specifically look at starting are with some communities in Washington State, which is where I'm from, it's where I live and where I work. Where I'm currently based is in Bellingham, Washington. As I mentioned, I'm lucky enough to be co-located with the Children of the Setting Sun Institute. And I would work on, I would start with probably at the neighborhood level in Bellingham, right? And I would manage a pilot program there, because I think from the neighborhood level, you can build up to go citywide. And I'm happy to talk about what a pilot might involve, but direct answer to your question, Bellingham.
And then just for thought exercise, let's do the other way. Let's say I was a billionaire and I handed you $500 million. What would you do with that money?
So I'd say thank you, first of all. I would go out and I would retain the best PR firm that I possibly could, because here's the thing. I enjoy writing and communicating and storytelling, and I also know that there is a lot more to the world of communication than I personally am really well equipped to provide to this project. So I need professional advice, right? And so in addition to beginning to build up that public relations and media campaign and really socialize these issues, I'd use that money to convene events, to send people to go testify at city council and state houses and eventually at the federal level, right? I would bring people together. I would bring leaders from Japan and from Eastern Europe and from places like Germany. All of these are countries that are experiencing population decline. And I would bring them together and I would begin convening a series of summits. You said $500 million? 500? Big numbers. So yeah, right. So we have this complementary media and public relations push that is getting the message out there, that is confronting these really scary ideas that we cannot continue to grow forever, and that is pointing out that climate change, getting real about growth and climate change, yes, there are political and systemic changes that need to happen, but there's also a psychic adjustment, a cognitive adjustment that needs to happen at the local and individual level. And I would pair that with directly beginning to bring people together and tell stories that come out of those gatherings, right? So I think that it has to be this cycle of action and publication, and making a lot of noise. So if you happen to know any billionaires who are interested, do let me know. Yeah, that'd be great. Okay. Thank you again for coming.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Up next, we have our AMPLIFY Fellow, Janine Jay David. Janine co-founded the Global Lab for Research and Action at UCLA. Prior to her work at UCLA, Janine held senior leadership positions at Spark, a national youth mentoring organization, and Plan UK, a global children's rights organization. Janine holds a master's in public policy from UCLA Luskin School of Public Affairs. She is a member of their MPP Alumni Council and a Luskin Alumni Career Leader. Janine is also a member of the LA Women's Collective. Janine Jay David was mentored by Dr. Andrea Capacchieri, who is a humanitarian aid consultant and university lecturer, and a member of the advisory committee of the Center for Public Health and Human Rights at Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health. Please welcome Janine.
Good morning, everyone. So before I begin today, I am going to share a trigger warning to just acknowledge that my content here today covers some really sensitive material related to sex work. I'd like to give anyone who wishes time to excuse themselves space, and while allowing for that, I'd like to briefly introduce myself, the organization I run, and the passion that fuels my work. So, my name's Janine Jay David. I'm a biracial daughter to parents who are there, who married across ethnicity and socioeconomic status. They were trailblazers then, and they're trailblazers now. I'm granddaughter to an immigrant Gambian stowaway, Dudu, as I used to call him, and mother to an Indian, American, British Indian 4-year-old daughter, Odetta. She's got quite the title there. I'm extremely proud to have you here with me today, Mum and Dad, having flown in from the UK last night, and they are extremely jet lagged. So my work has traversed global to local, as Jasmine said, but whether through my role at Plan International, where I work to advance the rights and equality for girls around the world, or Spark, which was a mentoring organization for underserved middle school students, the thread throughout has always been the same. How can I improve the lives of those who are most overlooked? Now remember that, as it will be relevant later. Those who are most overlooked. Now, during my graduate studies at UCLA, I met development economist Dr. Manisha Shah, and 5 years later, together we co-founded the Global Lab for Research in Action. We study together critical social justice issues faced by hard-to-reach populations worldwide. We then translate the findings into more digestible formats, like op-eds, like policy briefs. And then, just like the name here, we amplify the findings and insights through podcasts, through interviews and social media to deepen public understanding, yes, but also to promote evidence-based policy. So back to why I'm here today. I'm here to talk to you about a national public social awareness campaign that we, the Global Lab, announced just last week on June 2nd for International Sex Workers Day. The purpose of the Red Umbrella campaign, as we named it, is to make sex work safer. But before I dive into the campaign itself, I'd like to provide a little bit of context. Now, I'm sure you'd all agree, everyone deserves to be safe at work, including sex workers. It's thought that there are more sex workers in the United States than female cashiers. While hard to estimate, we believe 1 million sex workers in comparison to 720,000 cashiers. Now, sex work includes the entire field of sexual services, including exotic dancing, escort services, web-based work, and prostitution. But sex workers are also mothers, they're students, they're our neighbors, colleagues, and friends, but often not thought of as so. Now, when I talk about sex work today, it's really, really important to acknowledge that sex work involves the exchange of sexual services for money or goods between two mutually consenting adults. Sex work is often incorrectly conflated with human trafficking, which involves threat, force, abduction, deception, and other forms of coercion. Critically, in those cases, there is no mutual consent between the trafficker and the trafficked party. Human trafficking is a violation of human rights. Sex work, however, is a non-coercive transaction between consenting adults. Now, sex work tends to be a taboo subject, despite being one of the oldest professions in the world. And public understanding is understandably limited. But we shouldn't allow our lack of understanding and, quite frankly, our discomfort prevent us from tackling really challenging issues. It's also heavily stigmatized, which causes much harm to the individuals who participate in sex work. Now, when we talk about safety, we often think about physical safety, but safety comes in many other forms. Safety from violence, yes, but what about protection from being evicted from your home? What about access to healthcare? What about comfort in knowing you can tell your family and your friends where you work? And in the United States, the majority of individuals who find themselves caught up in the criminal justice system due to the criminalization of this work are Black and brown low-income women. So back to our campaign. For all these reasons, the Global Lab at UCLA is leading a national social awareness campaign to educate the public on what prevents sex workers from being safe in their workplace. This campaign has two components, and I want to explain a little bit about these components and their purpose. First, we'll be addressing the stigma I described associated with sex work. Now, how will we do that? We'll be elevating the voices and the narratives of those with lived experience to humanize the individuals who participate in sex work, to share their rich identities that go far beyond their job. Secondly, and this is where the Global Lab comes in, we'll promote policy solutions for advancing safer sex work using rigorous data. And we're fortunate that my co-founder, Dr. Manisha Shah, just so happens to be one of the leading global researchers on sex work. Earlier on, we talked about global to local. We're taking global research and bringing it local. And why these two components? We all know that policy change is hard. We need to change hearts and minds. Hearts through storytelling and minds through data. It's really challenging to advance policy solutions when there is just so much stigma. So in order to change the narrative about sex work, we'll be interviewing sex workers themselves to ask them what would make their lives safer. We'll be raising their voices through what we call the I wish element of the Red Umbrella campaign. Their narratives will help us all better understand what prevents sex workers from being safe in all its form. Their quotes, though, that we provide and we amplify will provide insight into their personal identities to challenge the stigmatization that sex workers face. And amongst all that storytelling, we'll be using data visualizations to help the public understand why they too should care about this issue. And we'll be sharing our research too. So as I shared, the Red Umbrella campaign was actually announced just last week on social media, June 2nd for International Sex Workers Day, to demonstrate our commitment to this work and really to open the dialogue and the invitation for others to join us. So this was phase one. We're entering phase two this summer. And this is when we are going to be busy proactively reaching out to others and other organizations to join us. And then phase three is what we call our fall launch, which will culminate on December 17th, which is International Day to End Violence Against Sex Workers. Our launch will consist of a national press release, a social media launch, press interviews, and more. Through social media and our dedicated website that we've already created, we'll be uplifting anonymous personal narratives and perspectives while informing, educating, and sharing research insights and policy recommendations. And we'll be inviting the public to show their solidarity by using social media filters and resharing our content. We'll also be identifying outspoken advocates. We need them to help us share our content, to destigmatize sex work, to use their voice and their platforms and really amplify the Red Umbrella campaign, to shift this dialogue and really to reduce stigma. So, who do I mean when I say we'll be inviting others to join us? Now, this is where I share a little bit about the Global Lab. We're an interdisciplinary hub. We're a bridge between researchers, practitioners, policymakers, but the general public too. Now, while sex workers and sex work organizations have been advocating for safer sex work for decades, the Global Lab at UCLA is in a unique position. We're a UCLA research institute. We can amplify voices, stories, and realities of those with lived experience, but we can also share a body of credible data from around the world that helps direct us to clear solutions to advance safer sex work. This advocacy work, it's not new, but what is new is our intention to broaden the conversation. So an important aspect of this strategy is expanding the breadth of participating organizations, and this takes a lot of legwork. We're delighted that we're already partnered with some national and local organizations and allies, including Decriminalize Sex Work, All Pros, the Woodwall Freedom Foundation. We've also been very fortunate that Savannah Sly, who joined our board, she's been giving us some great counsel on the campaign, and she is an individual with lived experience. We're also in conversations already, which is pretty exciting, with a broader range of ally organizations, including ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and Human Rights Watch. And you might wonder how niche this topic is, and I'm not going to ask you to read this list, but you'll see it's not a niche topic at all. When we think about sex work, it's relevant to disability rights, harm reduction, housing, homelessness, immigration rights, labor rights, LGBTQ+ rights. I mean, the list goes on. And this is our form asking others to get, other organizations to get involved. So you might ask yourself, why should I care about this? So while our campaign is very much a public-facing campaign to change hearts and minds, ultimately our goal, but don't tell anyone, is to expand access to safety for sex workers in the United States by taking active steps to ask policymakers to make sex work safer through the decriminalization of sex work. Decades of research, which we have from around the world, shows that the criminalization of sex work is actually what makes the work fundamentally unsafe. And it impacts the wider community too. Furthermore, while there is much appetite for decriminalizing sex work across the country, in fact, 52% of American voters strongly or somewhat support the decriminalization of sex, we here in the United States still criminalize it. In fact, just a few months ago, here in the North Hollywood Strip Club, dancers presented petitions to the owners of the club, demanding them to end firings and bad club policies that put their safety at risk. So this really impacts us locally too. So just to recap, today I provided you with a little bit of context. There are two components of the Red Umbrella campaign. We're changing hearts and minds through storytelling and data. We're launching a public awareness campaign. So this is a social media filter that we've designed. And we're using changing hearts and minds through storytelling and data. And I've explained our three phases. Our recent announcement on June 2nd, coalition building this summer, and our public fall launch. So what's next? Like I said, everyone deserves to be safe at work, including sex workers, a population who is overlooked. So what am I asking you to all commit to? I'm asking you to commit to participating in the Red Umbrella campaign in whatever capacity you can give, to endorse our campaign, to join the movement in the fall, and use your voice and reach to change hearts and minds and make sex work safer. We're seeking high-profile influencers and journalists to fuel the movement. We're speaking with global researchers who can endorse the campaign, and we're grateful to have secured 2 funders already, but we are seeking additional investments of $75,000 so that we can cover campaign costs, including my first hire, which would be the incredible undergraduate who designed our branding, and he's graduating today, and that's why they're not here. We are also looking to expand our brand identity, expand our collateral. We want to contract a PR company who can do a much better job of spreading the word than we can. And we want to be able to compensate the sex workers for their time when we interview them, as well as Instagram influencers who will be asking to promote this work. And lastly, it's not my forte, but we really would like to bring on board a social media management and evaluation organization so they can see how our messages are being received and where we're getting traction. So I'd like to ask you to please learn more about our work. I'll be here after we conclude, and I'd love to speak with anyone who'd like to learn more about the Red Umbrella campaign or get involved. And before I conclude, I just want to leave you the words of Savannah, who, like I mentioned, is our board member, and she's a sex worker advocate and a sex worker herself. She told me, when I began sex work at age 18, it became apparent to me that the dangers I faced were perpetuated by criminalization and stigma more than the work itself. The dangers are unnecessary and must be addressed. Thank you.
Janine, thank you for that. I'm
Thank
ashamed
you.
to admit I hadn't thought about this issue, and I really appreciate you taking the time
Thank
to
you.
educate me, and I'm certainly excited to be an ally in this
Thank
cause
you.
moving
And
forward.
honestly, before I met Manisha Shah, I hadn't thought much about it either.
Yeah.
And it's an important topic.
For first question, and sorry if I missed this, is there a story behind the name of the organization?
There is, in fact, and I may even have it. It's gone on. I may have had it. So the Red Umbrella was actually created by the individuals who want to use the umbrella as a symbol of protection. And so really it's about, safety, fighting for their rights. And that's why we chose to call it the Red Umbrella campaign. So you'll actually find that when there are sex work organizations doing work, they use red umbrellas to show their solidarity. And one idea we've actually had for the campaign is to be able, that's why we have the umbrella for the social media filter, but being able to give sort of people, influencers, red umbrella with all the organizations on so they can really raise awareness around Red Umbrella. And it's also a really accessible way to catch attention, because what we're really trying to do, and you might notice with our branding, and I'm even trying to wear those colors today, it's a color palette that's accessible. So a lot of what we've seen done in the past with some of the organizations, it's very, very sort of very, very direct. It's very bright. And what we're trying to do is change hearts and minds. And that really means about humanizing and making people feel accessible to the work that we're doing, because there is so much stigma associated with this topic.
Are there any communities or countries around the world that you all look at as a model of something that we could aspire towards?
We do, and in fact, we were just talking about New Zealand, a really interesting organization. And this is actually where I want to sort of go a little bit more into the policy, because there's a reason we're doing this right now. It's because there are a lot of progressive feminists who are actually supporting what we call the end demand model, which you might be familiar with, because it's actually what they've renamed the equality model, which is really dangerous. Because if I, as a feminist, heard the word equality model, I'd say that sounds like a great policy. I want to support that. What the end demand policy does is actually it criminalizes the buyer and not the seller. So you might think that's good, right? It's like, oh, great, the women who are engaging in this work will not get arrested, but their clients will. Now, have you ever heard about sort of helping to support individuals through their work by essentially arresting their clients, their buyers? So what you're ultimately doing is actually, and Manisha Shah has done research on this, you're making their workplace it's a market riskier. So what you find happening is those with low risk tolerance, those clients, they move out of the market. Guess who moves in? Those with higher risk tolerance. So what we're talking about is lowering pricing. We're also talking about unprotected sex. And what you find is that STDs and STIs increase in the wider community. not just sex worker community, the wider community. And what we also see is violence in the community increasing. So when we hear the word end demand or equality model, which you see a lot of the Nordic countries have been promoting, unfortunately, what's happening here in the United States is policymakers are hearing this, and it's far more palatable than the decriminalization of sex work. And so that's what they are going for and supporting. And that is why this campaign is so important right now, and why it's so critical right now, is because we are essentially up against a really sort of powerful and wealthy individual who is funding the End Demand campaign, and they're based on the East Coast. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Janine. That was a wonderful presentation and very, very important work. Our next presenter is Dr. Sonia Sharifafard. She is a postdoctoral research fellow at Pepperdine University. Her research focuses on international policy and food systems. Dr. Sharifafard has co-authored book chapters in New Horizons, in Positive Leadership and Change, and Workplace Spirituality and Fulfillment. She has presented at major international conferences and has served on the review panel of global institutions, such as the American Education Research Association, the Academy of Management, and the International Leadership Association. Dr. Sharifafard holds a PhD in Global Leadership and Change from Pepperdine University and a Master's of Arts in Organizational Leadership from Woodbury University. She was mentored by Christine Tran, who is the Executive Director of the Los Angeles Food Policy Council. Please welcome Dr. Sonia.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time on a Friday morning. I really appreciate your service, your leadership, and your commute. Thank you to President Green, Carmel, Imran, Jasmine, Valerie Wimes for all making this day possible. When I had the pleasure of being an undergraduate student at the Fashion Institute of Design and Merchandising, I came across a faculty mentor who recruited me to serve as editor-in-chief of our student publication. At that time, I was 19 years old, and I had a big leadership position to step into. One day, when we were looking at our photo shoot photos for our next issue of the publication, the advisor took me aside and said, "Sonia, I need to speak with you. Did you know your writers, your photographers, your graphic artists, and some of your most pristine writers are sleeping in their cars? Some are international students. They don't know where their next meal is going to come from. They don't know how the food system in America works, and they are sleeping in their cars, but yet they make time to make this magazine possible." At the time, my response was, "Isn't there a student success advisor? Isn't there a dean of student services? Isn't there a coordinator?" But I thought to myself, maybe it's not about who is a leader. Maybe it's not about who is in the institution. Perhaps it's about who can I serve, and is it my time to communicate with my staff, my colleagues, and my constituents in a more open way, and not just for the purpose of what we're here for. In fact, my name is Sonia, but up until 4th grade, my colleagues would delightingly call me lasagna, because in my household, we followed a halal diet, and my parents are Iranian immigrants. And so when I grew up in New Jersey, we had to travel about 3 miles in our local neighborhood to get ethnic food, and about 3.5 hours to get to our local halal or kosher place to get a meal. So while I could have spent that 3 hours studying, hanging out with friends, or developing a new project for class, I was in the car of my parents' Honda Civic waiting to go to Peterson, New Jersey to find accessible food. And so food was always a part of my identity. And so while I have the pleasure and the privilege of not having to have suffered from food insecurity, I do know a great many of my colleagues who have experienced very high or extremely high levels of food insecurity. And so I welcome the Center for Global Food Engagement in Los Angeles. We see over 4 in 6 children yearly suffering from food insecurity at the K through 12 level. When they get to college, that doesn't change. 2 in every 3 students does not know where their next meal will come from. They rely on ramen noodle soup, their local food pantry, or their dining meal plan. And if I go back to my case, when I was in college and when I was in high school, elementary school, and kindergarten, our meal plan wasn't accessible to me. In fact, the cafeteria lady came to me one day and said, "Sonia, it's Friday. We have cheese pizza for you." And by that time, I thought it was humorous, but I did not take it lightly. And that followed me to see, when I'm walking around campus, when I see a local food court, is that really where I am? Is where I am who I am? The purpose and importance is the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated food insecurity at the local level as well as the global level. For halal and kosher food, we see a lot of that produced and the poultry coming exported through Australia and New Zealand respectively. And in Los Angeles, it's less than a $500 million market. Yet we have over 8 million residents who follow a halal or kosher diet collectively. That affects their meetings, the jobs they pursue, the commute time, where they go for their lunch break, and how they have these conversations about food at the dinner table with their families. So sometimes we see campus food pantries. In fact, in 2018, a young individual who was going to study political science at a university in Los Angeles was on a campus tour in her senior year to see where would I go for college. Her mother, during the lunch break, went over and saw a long line and assumed that it was a line for the local theater performance. Little did she know that that line was in fact for the food pantry. When she asked the food pantry coordinator, why is there a line? She said, simply because parents cannot afford their students to go on a meal plan, and international students are not aware of food that they can have at the campus dining hall, so they must rely on the food pantry as their only option. Taken aghast at this billion-dollar university, she decided to tell her student, if you get admitted here, and if you come here, I want you to change the foods that go into this pantry. I want you to think of not only your next meal, but your roommate's next meal, and the students who are in your respective program in political science to take a look at this issue. And so she has. And we've been collaborating on the center at the university level to see how do we advance student success. If hunger is on your mind, if hunger is preventing you from living a quality social life, if hunger is a part of your story, you cannot live to your fullest potential at the academic and professional level. If hunger is always on your mind, your community cannot align with your values. Your community cannot be a part of your family history, your family legacy, and your generational cohort of scholarship, professional advancement, and development. So we see campus food pantries as well as food banks who have relied on places of worship. They are not funded at the level that they should. They have foods that are very low in macronutrient content and foods that are very high in trans fat and sodium. So it actually perpetuates the cycle of food insecurity. And we see foods that you can get at a grocery store, foods that are donated through the Good Samaritan law, and no one's really screening if it's good food. What does the sell-by date mean? Sometimes these labels, frankly, could be meaningless. But it also affects the student's diet when they have to perpetually think, where is my next meal coming from? Why do I have to get food from the pantry? Why can't I get food that I'm accustomed to consuming or food that I could have that could help performance and can help endurance? The design of cities also impacts this. So I encourage you all to take a look at Fairfax Avenue, Wilshire Boulevard, Olympic Boulevard, and to take a look at the nearest radius of a food store. And if you see that same exact food store of what they offer, whether it be a grocery store, a convenience store, or a strip mall food retailer, and ask yourself if this is somewhere where a university student would go and why. Now, we can't assume that if every community, every university had healthy foods, that they would all consume that and have high macronutrient content, live purposeful lives of service and leadership, and not think about food and hunger. That's just not how diets works. So we look at geography, dietetics, international food, the supply chain, and of course, global trade to help solve these issues. And the center's purpose is to bring in researchers, program assistants, and program services so that we can have legislative offices, the Dean of Student Services, food service providers, and students to have a large national conversation about law, policy, and student success. We also need to have equitable distribution. So I'm asking for about $3,000 in startup cost to help for meal delivery plans, where if temporarily your food service needs are not met at the university level, you can have a subscription to a meal delivery plan that will come to your dorm, or if you're a commuter student, at your respective place of residence. And we're also asking for our public relations and licensing fees to help. Food is very challenging. So we ask ourselves, if there was to be a new retailer or a grocery store at your community, what would they need? What infrastructure would help supply their respective needs? Would they have to start from the ground up? Or would they use whatever they have? Would a food pantry and their storage be enough? or would you have to have non-perishable goods for an entire semester? We also see that cross-exposure of items is respectfully prohibited in some respective ethnic, cultural, religious backgrounds. We also look at student athletes, those who follow a respective diet, and how you must change your gloves, you must not have the food placed within X amount of space from another food, and the menu has to be consistent. And so the educational program that I am suggesting is to have a webinar, a weekly speaker series to expand the conversation, have intercultural and interfaith dialogue and diplomacy, and to have law, agriculture, and science at the forefront of the table. Irrespective of your program, we need to have these issues addressed, and I really thank you for your support, and I'm happy to take your questions. Thank you.
Dr. Sonia, I can certainly empathize with the 3-hour drives to find halal food. I grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and we had to drive up to Atlanta, Georgia every couple of months. So I can certainly empathize with that. So who are you going to be soliciting this fundraising from? Who do you think would be an ideal partner that's providing you with funding?
Thank you, Imran. Ideally, it would begin at the university level. If you are a state university and you serve public university students, you would have to start with your respective committees. Instruction Related Activities Committee, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Committee, and the Anti-Racist Committees that are beginning to ramp up since 2022. We would also have to ask for nonprofit funders and those foundations who could work at the university level.
And do you foresee this becoming a national, international type of program? And how do you hope or plan to scale it to address those larger platforms?
Thank you. I would like it to be an international research center where students from the US and hopefully across the world can be able to participate in our research activities and also solicit funding so that food pantries can look different than what they look like today. Thank you. Thank you all for your time.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sonia. Next up, we have Radine Rahimzadeh. Radine is the co-founder and CEO of 4Transit. Recently, she and her team have been recognized by Forbes 30 Under 30 for pioneering the next generation of technology in the manufacturing and industry category. Last year in 2021, Radine was recognized by the International Transportation and Automotive Summit as a top 100 leader in the transportation and automotive industry. Prior to founding 4Transit, Radine worked at Advanced Mobility Group. She received her dual bachelor's degree from the University of California, Davis in Economics and International Affairs with a minor in Spanish. She received her master in public policy at the University of Southern California, Sol Price School. Radine is a founding partner at Meta Mural Inc. and serves as a board member of STEM in the Park. Radine Rahimzadeh was mentored by Matt Peterson, who is the president and CEO of LA Clean Tech Incubator. Please welcome Radine.
Okay, first of all, thank you, Dr. Sonia, for spotlighting food insecurity, and I actually hope to work with you one day so that not only we have accessible food for folks in our communities, but also the transport of that food is sustainable as well. Which brings me to why I'm here today. And so I am Radine, as Jasmine mentioned, and I am the founder and CEO of 4Transit, where we are innovating for the sustainable movement of people and goods. And how we do that is actually that we've invented 2 patent pending hardware products that attach to the exterior of trucks, medium and heavy duty vehicles, as well as an IoT air quality monitoring device. So we're focusing on fuel efficiency as well as environmental impact. Now, in order to paint a better picture of what we actually do, I want everyone here today to imagine a windy day. And I know we don't get a lot of that in Los Angeles. So if you've ever visited for the city that I'm from, San Francisco, you know that it's a constant struggle. Now, I also want you to imagine if I put on your jacket a lot of tiny little golf balls, right? And they have these intricate little dimples on them. And what that allows for you to do is to easily move through and maintain your momentum and not get exhausted? How? The air glides right off of you and it creates this pathway for you, reducing that struggle. And it's not just trucks that we're targeting, it's multimodal. So we have non-dry goods tankers, we have trains, we have trucks that carry cargo containers. So really going across the transportation landscape. And how we've done this is that we've repurposed history. So the golf ball, we've scaled and optimized that geometry to go on side skirts for vehicles that then save up to 1,200 gallons of fuel per truck per year. The second technology harks even further back in our history to the armor, the medieval armor, and that pointed shape we've actually been able to leverage to create a technology that saves up to 3,000 gallons of fuel per vehicle per year. So what we're really targeting is costs on two fronts. One, obviously, for fleet owners and operators, and then us as end users, our pocketbooks are saved a little bit, right? And we're able to save upwards of $6,000 to $7,000 per vehicle. But most importantly, there's the cost to health. And what we've discovered is that medium to heavy duty vehicles actually contribute to $53 billion in health costs. And that might just be a number, but when you look behind those billions, it's actually lives saved or lives lost. It's respiratory and cardiovascular health issues that arise from air pollution. And I keep mentioning we, and it's because I'm supported by an incredible team of co-founders. My CTO, Ryan Logsden, has been building devices and things all of his life with his grandfather. And once he was able to learn how to code software, he gave these inanimate objects life. My chief financial officer, Armin, has had decades of experience helping medium to different types of startups and other businesses financially operate and strategically operate efficiently. And then there's me, who's obsessed with sustainability. When I was 6 years old, me and my dad built our first drip water irrigation system in our backyard. And we moved now here to adulthood, where I've been, deploying connected autonomous vehicle and smart city infrastructure deployments in the Bay Area. And when you take all of that brain power and all of that ambition and put it back to the table, where you wanted to, do more. We didn't want to just stop with the hardware products. So we asked ourselves, how do we convert climate change contributors to more as climate change agents? And that's where the Birdie Box comes to life. And it has an accompanying dashboard as well. The Birdie Box itself is small, it's lightweight. We pack about 16 different environmental sensors into it, and it dynamically collects data across our neighborhoods mile by mile. And down there you can see kind of how tiny and small and put together it is. And what the Amplify program really allowed me to do was research even more into the impacts of why this device and this technology is important and why we need to build it for our communities. And to give some perspective, more than 70 million people in the United States live near truck and freight routes and are affected by that pollution as results. And to bring it back home to Los Angeles County, more than 60% more of Angelenos and our families are exposed to air pollution than the state average of folks due to medium to heavy duty vehicles. And this is where it gets really sad. The American Lung Association recently released an air report, and they gave Los Angeles a grade of F. That means we failed. We failed our residents, we failed our families. But I can't point to a certain agency or a certain person and say it's your fault, because there's a chronic data problem and you can't measure what matters. So there's, these sensor systems by the government, there's sensor systems from private companies, you might have heard of them, Purple Air, et cetera. But the issue is twofold. One, they're spread so widely apart that they don't portray an accurate picture of our communities. And then two, there's no data integrity and no one's really, holding the data accountable. And so these really important toxic releases or pollution outbreaks are kind of missed every day, day to day. And if you can tell by the map, those who suffer the most are equity priority communities and our underserved communities. And then also within the 16 weeks, I was able to talk to speakers and all of our amazing, mentors and folks from the Pacific Council, which allowed me to see there are 3 key things that I need to focus on. 1, air pollution solutions cannot be one-dimensional. And so that's the ethos that we pulled into building our technology and our dashboard and making sure that the data is, common language and actionable for multi-stakeholders. Next is that air pollution solutions require neighborhood level data so that we can actually target and be able to impact the neighborhoods that need better policies faster, sooner, and better. And lastly, air pollution solutions cannot be single stakeholder. As a society, we like to tackle big problems in silos, and these chronic health issues just keep persisting because we're not collaborating. Which brings me to, not only are we innovative in our technology, we're also innovative in our business model, and we found a way to bring everybody in. We have public folks from local and state agencies in the mix, not-for-profits, I apologize for the word nonprofits down there, and have community-based organizations and foundations involved. And then lastly, we found a way to bring in hospitals, real estate companies, and think tanks to contribute to the problem solving. Our local to global roadmap is very clear. We finalized terms with an LA City partner, and we begin a 1-year, 4-quarter proof of concept pilot. We use the first 3 quarters to do the data capture and all of that, and then the last quarter to really iterate the dashboard and make sure that all of the stakeholders are able to use this language and find the data actionable. We move to 235 localities, and then we go global. The cost of the Birdie Box is $459, and as we grow and we scale, we're able to bring that cost down to only $130 and make sure that it's accessible for all of the communities that we're operating in, as well as capitalize on economies of scales for sensor technologies. My ask here today is $400,000 for pilot deployment, and that breaks down for the cost for the 20 Birdie Boxes that we're going to be deploying, as well as operational and maintenance costs. So in addition to investment, I'm also seeking from my Amplify and Pacific Council families, as well as our greater community here today, to connect me to municipalities, fleet owners, operators, as well as any individual who is connected to this mission and moving the health of our communities and better air quality for everyone forward. And when you go to lunch today, I know that I'm the last presenter, I want you to think about the food that's on the plate and think about how it got there and how we can work together to change how that food is sustainably moved mile by mile, neighborhood by neighborhood. Thank you, everyone.
This is awesome. Thank you for sharing all that. So what do you think is your defensible product? Is it the hardware? Is it the software? Is it the data that you'll be providing? What do you think prevents other players from entering this market?
I know you have some familiarity with transportation and technology. So the sensors themselves, right, are off the shelf. And that's done with the purpose of, capitalizing on volume. So it really is the software, and IoT is actually very expensive to operate because when you read and send receipts of the information, it can get really expensive. But what Ryan has done is come up with a really elegant code that significantly reduces that communication cost. So to directly answer your question, it's the software.
And who do you think of as your customer? Is it the cities and states? Is it the truck companies? How do you think about the customers for this?
Sure. So we see the trucks, or we're also targeting fleets of buses, or folks who are in the mail carrier business, UPS, postal, as stakeholders. And then we're seeing the end customer to being cities, think tanks, real estate companies, hospitals, mostly the private sector, and anyone else who would benefit from, if it's a foundation or community-based organization, from the data as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Radine. That was a wonderful presentation. As she mentioned, we will now be breaking for lunch. It will be located outside on this beautiful Los Angeles day. Drinks will stay inside in the back of this room, and we have hand sanitizers near the food station. I welcome all of you to introduce yourself to these wonderful Amplify Fellows, ask questions, make connections, dive deeper into these really short conversations that they've began. And I thank you so much for being here. We'll resume around noon. Thank you. Welcome back, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for the second part of the Amplify Pitch Day and Culmination Ceremony. We hope that you had a wonderful lunch at this beautiful venue, and we hope that you were able to make new connections, make new relationships, and dive deeper into some of the conversations that you started and heard today. Our next Amplify Fellow presenter is Lyla Green. She is the president of Women in International Security Western Region, where she has been hosted at the United Nations in New York and has spoken in front of delegations from the U.S. Department of State. She founded the chapter at the Middlebury Institute for International Studies, her alma mater. Lyla also works in global trade compliance at Autodesk, where she has been invited to participate in strategic trade controls roundtables at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, as well as advise and coach multiple students and young professionals towards a career in trade compliance. Prior to her career in national and international security, Lyla was an actor, a dancer, director, and producer in the theater and film industries. Lyla holds a BFA in theater from DePaul University and an MA in non-proliferation and terrorism studies, focusing on financial crimes management. Lyla Green was mentored by Dr. Joyce New, who is the founder and senior associate of Facilitating Peace. Please welcome Lyla Green.
Thank you, Jasmine, for that lovely introduction. I will not be using slides. It's all me. I hope you guys are into that. So thank you again for everyone joining us today at the Pacific Council Amplify Pitch Ceremony. It's wonderful that you came out with all these competing priorities. So I'm truly grateful, and I know my fellow fellows are as well. I am Lyla Green, and I'm going to start with a bit of a story so you can get to know me and where I'm coming from. 20 years ago, I was in Nigeria for an internship with the US Embassy in Lagos. My parents were in the Foreign Service, and I was fortunate enough to be offered a summer position through them. The curious aspect was, I was a theater major. I was in the middle of my BFA, and I had never been to a country like Nigeria before, never been to a city like Lagos before, and I had also never been amongst policy and security folk before. And I came away from this experience thinking the most pressing issues are worse than I ever could have thought without seeing them face to face in real life. I started to think, how can we fix the level of depletion and suffering that I'm seeing? US national security policy has barely changed since World War II and has not changed at all since 9/11. On the heels of everything, from the fall of Afghanistan to the Taliban, the January 6th insurrection on the US Capitol, the Russian-Ukrainian war, to gun violence right here in the United States, it's clear that we have to come up with new ways to handle the challenges out there. My intention is to see a day when the global defensive posture norm is security through peace. I am motivated by a desire to just work myself right out of a job, and I envision this as being possible only through a new approach to problem solving, policy creation, and active operationalization. Resilience can only go so far. Let's create something for a post-resilience world. Let's aim for true, achievable peace. This is how I propose that we get there. A novel organization which brings together governmental and security leadership with artists of all kinds in a live space to dynamically solve the most urgent issues facing local, regional, national, and global policymakers. I call this the Particle Accelerator. Particle accelerators smash atoms together in a large, high-speed environment with the intention of creating an entirely new element. This scientific practice inspired me many years ago when I was an artist in the entertainment field. Cut to now, when I'm a security professional. I am still compelled by this kernel of thought. What if we had a physical space in the spirit of Andy Warhol's factory mixed with a particle accelerator, brought a wide swath of visionaries together from disparate communities in this unique, secure space to create something new that would change the world? What level of progress could we achieve by trying a new way to approach old and destructive problems? To meet this goal, we would require a functional space that physically brings together these groups to do the following. 1, create solutions for complicated policy issues, civil social problems, and national and international security concerns. 2, create more engaging and easily consumable media to educate the public on political and security agendas, issues, developments, etc. 3, help develop compassion and influence a more balanced point of view in our governmental leadership. 4, develop achievable schedules bound in a sacrosanct commitment for implementation of these schedules. And 5, have that space where two groups are motivated and inspired by each other while independently working. How is the Particle Accelerator different from other organizations doing peace and security? Because clearly this is quite a buzz phrase lately. We are actively and specifically bringing artists into the Situation Room. Artists have been affecting policy unintentionally for documented time. And here's a really good recent example. Do you remember the movie Super Size Me? Okay, I see a lot of nods. A lot of people remember it. For those of you who have never seen it though, a filmmaker named Morgan Spurlock decided to eat McDonald's for a month straight, 3 times a day, and had to get the supersized option if it was offered to him. He also reduced his exercise to the American average. What he ended up making changed food policy forever. Fast food restaurants across the board, especially McDonald's, changed their menus, changed the quality of their food, changed sourcing techniques. Schools began to change their cafeterias. New businesses started cropping up, offering healthier options. 20 years later, we are still seeing the effects of that one documentary, and that was largely an unintentional outcome. What if we tried intentionally to change policy with the help of artists? The artists will come from all over: the film industry, the theater industry, painters, musicians, illustrators. We will reach out to respected individuals and organizations. A great example of the type of artists and organizations we are going to bring together is the recent partnership between the RAND Corporation and Georgia Loopy for the project Art Plus Data. This partnership, this project, was a totally novel, unique, singular project, but most of all, it was rare. Let's make these partnerships less rarefied and make them more mainstream. What makes an artist different, what makes me different as well, is that we are always searching for the truth and are rarely, if ever, satisfied with the status quo. In a famous exchange between legendary dancers Agnes DeMille and Martha Graham, Martha said, "Keep the channel open. No artist is pleased. There is no satisfaction whatever at any time. There is only a queer, divine dissatisfaction, a blessed unrest that keeps us marching and makes us more alive than others." Many policymakers do their best, but many also rest on their laurels. Many are stubborn. I'm not trying to insult them. I'm merely pointing out a cultural issue that needs a shot of adrenaline. Clearly, we need something to change. And artists do not resist change. They seek it. They embrace it. One of my fellows here at Amplify recently said to me, "How do we pivot in times of urgency?" If there is anyone who would know how to teach others how to pivot, adapt, change tack in the blink of an eye, it would be people who are used to working under scrappy circumstances. When funding suddenly disappears, venues are suddenly falling apart, when colleagues suddenly take ill and it's you that needs to go on stage, and the policy folk, the security professionals, the leadership who need to figure out how to spread the dimes to cover all of the needs of a region, a state, a country, they would be able to take these new ideas to a level of use that is far beyond the access of a single artist. Where you can be fundamentally helpful is to invest in the startup of this project so we can dive right into solving these issues with our full infrastructure ready. I am asking for $1.25 million to get the full infrastructure and staffing salaries from day one. It is especially important to me to appropriately pay people who will be graciously working for me and for us all. As a single mother, to quote the masterwork musical Chicago, I just can't do it alone. One person can obviously do a lot, but it takes a community to do it all the way. You can help bring the Particle Accelerator to life by funding the project. And with this, you will play a fundamental role in a more secure, safe, happy life for all people. We would be a dynamic group, bringing the resource together with the knowledge base. A great example is the Carter Center, who in a 20-year campaign have managed to nearly eradicate guinea worm from sub-Saharan Africa, a devastating parasite that used to kill thousands in a despicable, avoidable death. This was only done by bringing together the resourced donors with the Carter Center knowledge base. Ever since the first atom was split in 1932, a new era of destruction began. And we can all say that it certainly has not subsided, if not has become worse. Let's make 2022 the year that we bring atoms together for a new world of reconciliation. One space, high speed, positive change. That is what the Particle Accelerator will be. Thank you.
Thank you, Lyla. This really resonates. I'm in conversations with a friend of mine who is a designer, and I'm encouraging him to run for a congressional seat in Ohio.
Nice.
And he's been asking me for like advice. I'm like, who should I talk to? And I'm like, you've been designing things that people care about for a long time. Like,
For sure.
trust your guts, trust your instinct. You have a lot of solutions.
That's
You don't
exactly
have to
right.
just follow the existing, solutions and archetypes. So this is really cool to hear.
Awesome.
My first question, though, is, I think that a lot of experts typically have a lot of skepticism around new ideas. How do you actually convince security experts to show up with their true selves with an open mind?
For sure. That is definitely something that I've experienced many times in a variety of contexts when it comes to security folk, especially when it comes to the language that one uses. You have to code switch when you're in the security community, which I'm really familiar with. This being said, there is a use case that I didn't even know about until fairly recently. You guys might be familiar with the actor Peter Coyote. He was very famous in the 70s and the 80s. He was in lots of movies. And he's also become kind of forever famous by being the main voice on Ken Burns documentaries. He lives in Sebastopol, which is sort of in the Bay Area. It's north of where I live in Berkeley. And it was one of those strings where you hear his name mentioned and you wonder what he's up to, and you look him up on Wikipedia and you start reading his history. And although I had seen his movies and obviously love his voice, I didn't realize until I read this Wikipedia page that he had worked in policy first. That was his first job, in state policy. And then he came up with the idea to bring some artists into the room at the state level when they were having challenges figuring out how to deal with certain social issues. And that was like a moment for me that I thought, this is something coming from the universe telling me that this is going to work, because there's actually a use case now that I can refer to. And so while that was unintentional and I came up with the idea on my own, to be able to demonstrate that there is someone of tremendous credibility who's already done it enables me to say, if you don't believe it's possible, look at Peter Coyote. He managed to do it in a state that is a country, more or less, with its GDP and its population and its diversity and the variety of needs we have here in California. I would hope that that would be enough, but if it weren't, I'd continue to work the angle, as they say.
And I don't know how to exactly phrase this next question, so there's no offense intended with this. But if you had to incorporate a third group, do you think that there could be some other group of individuals outside of artists or security experts that could be value add to this space? Or do you think this is like something that these two groups need to really work on together?
Right. And I mean, no doubt. And that's kind of one of the things that makes it wonderful bringing these two worlds together. The unconventionality of artists is open to that type of change. And I think at the end of the day, that is going to be the thing that will influence the policy community, the security community, and leadership, is that they will start to become more malleable, and to use a very Silicon Valley phrase, because I live up in the Bay Area, agile. They're going to become more open by virtue of being around that mindset. And so who would it be? Who would this third group be? I don't know off the top of my head, but I'm completely open to it. And I believe that everyone else would just naturally be open to it too, because that's the type of environment we're trying to create. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lyla. What a wonderful presentation, and what a wonderful way to rethink how we interact with one another. Our next Amplify Fellow presenter is Dr. Tadio Spelle. He is the founding president of the U.S. Africa Institute. Previously, he was a Human Rights Fellow at the United States Human Rights Network. He also worked as a principal representative to the United Nations Economic and Social Council. He is the founding member of the International Virtual Exchange Learning Committee at the California State University Dominguez Hills, and also serves as the president of the board of directors at Talion Academy in California and Arizona. Dr. Tadio Spelle attended the University of San Francisco School of Law and received a Master of Laws where he specialized in international law. He also attended the Executive Education Program at the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and completed his doctoral degree in global education at the University of Southern California. Dr. Tadio Spelle was mentored by H. Perry Boyle, who is the chairman and board of the BOMA Project and the president of Affordable Housing Coalition of Ketchum LLC. Please welcome Dr. Tadio Spelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for coming, family, friends, and the Pacific Council. Thanks for creating this space in this, giving us, this opportunity. I will just share and then Dr. Jill for telling me to apply to this project, to the AMPLIFY Fellowship. Thank you so much. So the U.S. African Institute, before diving into my project or organization, in fact, let me tell you about my story, my personal story. A refugee. I came to the United States almost 11 years ago in a search of a better life and in protection. I left, I escaped a dictatorship from Ethiopia almost 11 years ago. And the challenge and the struggle that I faced while I was in college, off campus, and that shaped my understanding about diplomacy, about people-to-people relationship, and the need to provide academic support to underserved students. And in fact, this organization is the product of my doctoral research. When I was at USC, I did a comparative study on the experience of Black students. I did some comparing studies in the Southern California colleges and universities. And my lived experience as a refugee and my passion for education and the love of public service are the driving force for me to start this organization. As you look at, the pictures here, the first picture when I became a U.S. citizen, that's almost 5 years ago, with my friends and then classmates from USC. There was Mayor Garcetti speaking on refugee and immigration issues at the city council, and also mobilizing our communities here in the Southern California area on social justice issues, and then, of course, with our Vice President Kamala Harris doing some advocacy work at the Capitol in DC. So this is me, this is my story. So my story, my lived experience, and the love of passion for education to make this world a better place, those are the driving force. Really, I'm doing this work from here, from my heart. So the U.S. African Institute, I'm sorry, Jerry, the U.S. African Institute is a 501c3. I'll change that, the nonprofits, I'll change that later. It's actually a nonprofit organization. We're recognized by IRS and also the California Secretary of State. I founded this organization to advance the strategic partnership between the United States of America and in Africa, primarily through education and exchange programs. And the vision is to be a catalyst in transforming the strategic partnership between the United States and in African countries and African nations. And the mission is to promote public diplomacy, facilitate exchange programs, and engage in advocacy towards educational equity and justice. So these are our leadership and then consultants. I'm the only volunteer here. I am a full-time volunteer, except some of, and then the rest of our consultants. We have a chief executive officer and also senior initiative officers. They are based in New York, and then the other one is based in South Sudan, and also our tech and then marketing people. And our executive board members, Perry, of course, my mentor, is also a board member, and then Lillian from South Sudan, who was a state minister before, and then all of the people who you see here to have some kind of connection to the continent of Africa. And these are our strategic advisors. And in our lecturers, starting from Ambassador Susan, who was the U.S. Former ambassador to South Sudan, and also my good friend, Professor Salim from California State University, Dominguez Hills, and also Professor Larry from Stanford Human Rights Center, and then also the rest of the professors. These are our lectures on democracy, human rights, and rule of law. I'll come to the project, the programming areas. So these are the programs that we have. So we have the Human Rights, Democracy, and Rule of Law Project, the Mandela Fellowship Project, the Integrated Virtual Exchange Learning Program, American Space Project, Student Recruitment for U.S. College, and Policy Advocacy and Capacity Building. These are the major programs that we have. Recently, we were selected by the U.S. State Department to host fellows from 26 African countries. And this is a flagship program of the State Department started by President Obama a few years, I believe 10 years or 11 years ago. So we'll be hosting 26 African countries in Los Angeles in July. And the programs supports the development of the fellows' leadership skills through academic study, workshop, mentoring, networking with U.S. leaders, and in collaboration with American citizens. And these fellows, during their time here, they'll connect with Americans. They'll learn more about American history, American culture, and tradition. The program also offers insight into a U.S. society through site visits, cultural exchange, and also this project will strengthen the connection between Americans and then Africans. So this is one of our projects that is funded by the State Department. And the other project is the Human Rights and Democracy and Rule of Law Project, and again funded by the U.S. State Department and the U.S. Embassy in South Sudan. So we're doing that. This is a local to continental Africa project. We have the local experts from here, and we have also local experts from the African countries. And why I'm doing this work? It's because it's in the economic, security, and political interest of the United States to strengthen a strategic partnership with African countries, and also with the hosting communities here in the United States, primarily the African immigrants or the Black immigrants and refugees. And our programs have students learn new language and then appreciate other cultures and gain a greater understanding about people-to-people relationship. The students who are participating in our programs, over 90% of them who participated in our programs significantly developed their intercultural skills, adaptability, self-awareness, confidence, and also access to personal and professional opportunities. And the local and international programs, or local and international programs, are also life-changing experience for many students from here, the US, as well as from Africa in many ways. And so far, what we have done over the last 1.5 years since the organization started, we have already impacted over 24,000 individuals through our Democracy, Human Rights, and Rule of Law project in South Sudan and in around Africa. And 3,100 students are already enrolled in our academic programs through the American Space Project. And then in Ethiopia, we'll be starting a summer camp program, which will be serving over 3,000 students. We are the first nonprofit agency in the southern part of this, the Southern California, to be funded by the U.S. State Department to host the Mandela Fellowship, and also the Democracy and the Rule of Law project of the State Department. And then we're also working with a number of academic institutions and then governmental agencies. So these are some of the impact that we're making. We're sharing our democratic values and practices to the world, to Africa, to be more specific. So these are some of the impacts that we are making so far. Like I said, I just left my job recently, my full-time job, to run this organization. Some of my staff, they are actually getting paid, but I'm not, because I have the passion and I just want to make sure that this organization is sustainable. So I need money. How much I need money? $500,000. For what? To hire a local and international staff, and also to run our programs. And then the funding will also give us the opportunity to invest on the organizational capacity and foster people-to-people relationship, and to provide academic support to students both in the United States and also in Africa. We will also narrow down the performance gap and improve the performance gap for historically underserved students, both here and also in Africa. We'll be able to, through this funding, we'll be able to influence, impact, and effect change in many ways, through advocacy, through direct service, and other programs. So that's the US Africa Institute in general. If you're interested in supporting this cause, please look at the website. Engage with us through our social media platforms on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn, and that's also the phone number, and then also my email. Thank you so much for creating this space again, and then everyone also for coming and championing in our cause. Thank you, really appreciate it.
Thank you, Doctor. Really great work. It's nice and wonderful to see the impact that you're already making. It's clear that you've dedicated a lot of time and energy into this. Who are you primarily sourcing fundraising from now, or who are you targeting fundraising from?
That's a good question. Thank you. Thank you so much. So the primary targets right now are governmental agencies like the State Department, USAID, and the Educational and Cultural Affairs for the State Department office. And also foundations, local foundations here, and also, international foundations to be able to, support our programs.
And let's say you receive all the funding, and over the next 10 years, where would you like to see this organization then? What type of impact, what type of programs, et cetera?
I had this question yesterday when I had a conversation with a potential funder foundation. The same question. This is a very difficult question, right? 10 years from now, so we'll be making a lot of impact in our students. Also, improve the relationship between African nations and in the United States over the last 4 years. Because of the administration the Trump administration, calling us, shithole, countries, right? So we want to make sure that, there is a narrative change and also, a strategic, partnership between, the African nations in the United States. And then again, I said, this is, in our, economic, political, and then security interest. We have a very, geopolitically important, place in the world. And so it is very important for the United States to be able to, a leader in the international stage by engaging with, African nations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tadios. Our next presenter and last presenter of the day is AMPLIFY Fellow Cassie Hermiston Boyd. Cassie works for Evacuator Allies in operations. Previously, she worked for London & Partners as the Business Development Associate, which is the Mayor of London's promotional and economic development agency that attracts foreign investment. She is a leadership fellow. She has a leadership fellowship with the Southern California Leadership Network, and she served as a board member and the events chair of the Los Angeles World Affairs Council's Young Professionals Program. She received her master's from the University of Glasgow in the UK and her bachelor's from the University of Arizona. Cassie Hermiston Boyd was mentored by Nell Katie Cruz, who is an independent risk consultant and board member of Barclays US and a member of the Pacific Council on International Policy Board as well. Please welcome Cassie.
A McKinsey Global Institute report found that 12 trillion could be added to global GDP by 2025 by advancing women's equality. The public, the private, and the social sectors will need to act to close gender gaps in work and society. Gender inequality is not only a pressing moral and social issue, but a critical economic challenge. If women, who account for half of the world's working age population, do not achieve their full economic potential, the global economy will suffer. The need is so great that the UN has listed gender equality and sustained economic growth in its top 17 sustainability goals. My mission is to promote business between Southern California and Canada's leading global cities with an emphasis on female-led businesses. My vision is to work with an innovative company that is looking to grow its global footprint into the Canadian economy, or partner with an organization that is committed to fostering stronger ties between global cities and international business growth. My local to global project came to light in March 2020, when companies were either adapting or shuttering during COVID. I saw especially how women were being affected, and I couldn't settle to watch hard-earned gains in female empowerment be diminished. I look forward to working with commercial partners. Getting ahead of myself. I look forward to working with commercial partners, associations, and stakeholders in Los Angeles, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal to support with business development and trans-commerce partnerships. These four cities share similar values and business opportunities. They are all global cities with a young, educated workforce that are driving vibrant, multi-sector economies. I look to build relationships with commercial partners who have expertise in Canadian law, tax, accounting, real estate, PR, to advise companies on the best routes to enter the Canadian market. The sectors I would focus on would be technology, the creative industries, urban infrastructure, financial, and life sciences. These transformative sectors will lead to investment in high-value jobs in Canada. In my previous role, I worked for London and Partners in Los Angeles, which is the Mayor of London's promotional and economic development agency, where I showcased the business opportunities in London to entrepreneurs across the US Southwest. One of my clients was LA-founded Bird e-scooters. They had their sights set on London, but were told by UK officials that e-scooters were not permitted on London streets. I was committed to changing that. I got Bird accepted into a pilot program at Here East. Here East is the former 2012 Olympic Park in London that is now a privately owned, thriving tech ecosystem. And this is a photograph of me in 2018 when I was interviewed on the 100-year anniversary of women being given the right to vote in the UK. And I was interviewed by the Mayor of London's office as not only a woman, but a woman in business and my contributions to London. And I was recently a youth delegate for the Summit of the Americas, and I work for an NGO called Evacuate Our Allies. California has always been an incubator for the world's most powerful and innovative companies. It has changed the way we live, work, and think. Despite its enormous VC presence, women do not receive the same recognition and venture backing as their male counterparts. The next global city I'm going to talk about is Toronto. Toronto is one of the most global multicultural cities in the world, with 51% of the population being foreign-born. It is a multi-sector economy where financial services, technology, the creative industries, urban infrastructure, and life sciences are represented. With its diverse population, it's an ideal city for attracting talent and meeting people who have connections to your next foreign market. Entrepreneurs have access to over 1 billion consumers through international trade agreements. Oh, and last but not least, that is the Creative Destruction Lab. That's the leading incubator in Toronto. And the region has over 250 ethnicities, which means life sciences companies can conduct research and globally diverse pool for clinical trials. It is the third largest technology hub in North America and is home to Marigold Capital, which is a VC that invests in women and underrepresented founders. And the Canadian Film Centre just launched Fifth Wave, which is its first female-led accelerator for digital media. Next city I'm going to talk about is Montreal. Montreal is recognized as Canada's international capital with the largest community of international organizations in the country and the third largest in North America. Montreal is a global leader in diverse subsectors: AI, gaming, clean tech, visual effects, smart mobility, and biotech. 55% of the population is bilingual and 20% is trilingual. And it happens to have the largest tech jobs of any of the three Canadian cities with the lowest cost of living. And this is Mila, which is a leading AI institute in Montreal. Next city I'm going to talk about is Vancouver. So more than 80 countries maintain a consular presence in Vancouver that are ready to support entrepreneurs with their next market expansion. In California, we talk about how it's a gateway to Asia. Well, in Vancouver is also a gateway to Asia, but also the US West Coast. Vancouver offers a business climate that's green, progressive, creative, and innovative. It also happens to have the largest digital media cluster and entertainment studios in the world. And it happens to be the third greenest city in the world and plans to be 100% renewable by 2050. And this is Centec, which is a leading tech incubator in Montreal. In Canada, there are economic opportunities for women. There's an ease of establishing a global presence, and there's an ease of doing business in a culture where women in entrepreneurship are welcomed. The Canadian government is taking bold steps to increase women's participation in leadership and business. Studies show that by advancing gender equality and women's participation in the economy, Canada could add up to 150 billion in GDP. It has launched a 15 million inclusive VC initiative aimed at building a more inclusive VC environment for Canadian women and to increase women's participation in the VC industry. The Bank of Montreal has announced a $5 billion commitment to support female-led businesses in Canada to mark International Women's Day. And SheEO is a Toronto-based VC for Toronto-based entrepreneurs working on businesses modeled on the UN sustainability goals. And the 51 is a Canadian-based VC for fintech companies. The EDC Inclusive Trade Investments Program provides equity capital to diverse exporters. I look forward to working with Southern-based startups to promote Canada's top leading green and female inclusive cities and work with partners and stakeholders to strengthen this ecosystem. I will encourage all businesses, regardless of their sectors, in joining the Canadian government in its commitment to creating a more sustainable, inclusive future for women. I just want to say thank you all for being here. Thank you to the Pacific Council, especially to Jasmine Rogala and to the cohort, to my parents. It's so nice to be in a room with so many people I respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. I've spent a lot of time in LA, Toronto, and Montreal, but I've never been to Vancouver, so this is helping convince me to. It's also the closest city to where I live in San Francisco, so I really should make the trip up there. So something you talked about at the end was that you are very open to working with any type of company or organization. I'm curious if there are specific size or types that you think would be more uniquely suited in terms of like a large tech company or startups or investors. Are there certain types of organizations that you think would have a stronger relationship between LA and these other Canadian cities?
I think, well, with my last job, I usually engage with companies of all different sizes, but a lot where, 20 people, 30 people, maybe had raised a Series A, Series B. So that would be kind of what I'd be thinking.
And as, I think this is a really, really great idea. As you think about you or your organization's like value prop, what do you think that the value proposition exactly would be? Is it your relationships, the ability to navigate tough regulatory environments, identifying tax incentives? Is there a specific value proposition that your organization would bring?
I think to bridge my experience, what I was doing at London and Partners and having the connections I have in Los Angeles while building the connections in Canada to connect people and to help women going forward as we navigate this post-COVID vaccine world. Thank you.
Thank you so much to Cassie. Wonderful presentation. And thank you to all of the fellows who came here today to culminate this Amplify program and be present every week and be proud and courageous in launching all of these initiatives forward. Thank you for impacting your local community, and thank you for impacting the global community at large. Thank you all to the friends, family members, guest speakers, mentors, and supporters who have helped the Amplify program and each of the fellows on this journey. Special thanks to the JL Foundation and the Confidence Foundation, without which this program would not be possible. I also want to give a special thanks to my colleagues at the Pacific Council, Jerry Green, who has been a true advocate from the very first day I met him. Carmel Lim, our VP and Managing Director, without which conceptualized the program. Nastasha Everhart and Mariah Nationales Tafoya, who recommended the speakers and are making sure everything today runs smoothly. And of course, Valerie Wimes, who was here with us our Amplify Fellows every week behind the scenes, making sure our tech ran smoothly and our events were successful. Thank you to everybody. Thank you to our wonderful panelists. All of the feedback from the panelists will be provided to the fellows independently, one-on-one, to allow them to continue and grow and launch their initiatives even further and get even stronger. As you all know, this is a culmination ceremony, and we have graduation certificates for all of the fellows who are culminating today. As I call your name, please come to the stage and stay here until all the fellows are announced. And we will have a group photo, one with the certificates and one without. So please join us. And then I will have my colleague Nastasha come help me. So our first fellow, Dr. Tadio Spelle. Our next fellow, Dr. Sonia Sharifafard. Our next fellow, Kyla Denwood. Our next fellow, Sarah Silaf. Our next fellow, Lyla Green. Cassie Hermiston Boyd. Janine Jay David. And last, but of course not least, Radeen Rahimzadeh. So as they take their picture, I just want to let you know that this concludes our official program. We welcome you all to continue to network with the fellows, build these connections, make recommendations, and learn more about their projects. Thank you so much.
Small space for that. Great.
I totally forgot it was you and I.
Okay, on three. 1, 2, and 3. Once more. 1, 2, and 3. Make sure that looks good. Looks great. We'll do it one more time. Okay, 1, 2, and 3. Thank you.